Welcome back to the Day's Adventure Podcast. This is episode 4 of the Woven and Curd series. I'm your host, David Visser, and today we step into the deeply personal pages of history. For the first time in this series, we'll read directly from my grandfather's handwritten journal. His own words, written in the midst of war, as he navigated a world turned upside down. His journal is just not a record of events, but a window into the emotions, fears, and decisions that shaped his survival. Through his entries, we'll experience life under occupation, what it meant to live in hiding, to escape the forced labor in Germany, and how he endured as Nazi rule tightened its grip on the Netherlands. But what if there's more to this story? What if, woven into these passages, there are clues that suggest my grandfather may have been more than just a young man trying to survive? What if he was involved in something bigger, something dangerous? As we read through his words and cross-reference them with historical events, we will explore the possibility that he was part of the resistance and the evidence that points in that direction. As we follow his words, we will cross-reference historical events, placing his experience within the larger narrative of World War II. What was happening in the Netherlands at that time? What new laws and crackdowns were taking place? What did it mean to be young, to have dreams, but to live in a time when survival became the only goal? Join me as we turn the pages of history, literally, and step into my grandfather's world during one of the darkest and most perilous periods of human history. By 1943, the Dutch resistance was no longer a scattered effort of isolated individuals. It had evolved into an organized and highly efficient network of fighters, saboteurs, and intelligent operatives. Nazi rule in the Netherlands had grown increasingly brutal, but so too had the courage and the determination of those who opposed them. Groningen, the city and surrounding countryside where my grandfather lived, became a hotbed of resistance activity. Groups such as the KP, a group specializing in violent sabotage, freeing prisoners, and assassinating high-valued Nazi targets, and the LO, which helped hide Jews, downed pilots, and resistance members, had fully mobilized by 1943. The OD, originally intended as an intelligence organization, also expanded into acts of sabotage and armed resistance. But the Nazis responded with unrelenting force. By mid-1943, mass arrests of Dutch resistance members were becoming common. Those caught faced immediate execution or were deported to concentration camps like Watt and Westerbork, where very few would survive. In Groningen, public executions were used as a warning to deter others from joining the resistance. One of the darkest chapters came with the razzia of 1943, where thousands of Dutchmen were rounded up and deported to labor camps in Germany. If you were between the ages of 18 and 45, you were at risk. Many young men were forced into hiding, including my grandfather. The Dutch resistance wasn't fighting in isolation. Across Europe, 1943 was a year of significant developments in the war. Some victories, some devastating losses. January 31st, 1943, the Battle of Stalingrad ends with the surrender of the German 6th Army, marking the first major defeat of the Nazis on the Eastern Front. In April the 19th, 1943, the Warsaw Ghetto uprising begins, with Jewish fighters resisting Nazi deportations, holding out for nearly a month against overwhelming odds. July 10th, 1943, the Allied invasion of Sicily begins, opening a path for the eventual downfall of Mussolini's regime in Italy. July 25th, 1943, Benito Mussolini is overthrown and arrested, weakening the Axis powers. October 1943, the Danish resistance successfully evacuates over 7,000 Jews to Sweden, thwarting Nazi plans for mass deportations. November 28, 1943, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin meet at the Tehran Conference, laying the groundwork for the eventual invasion of Nazi-occupied Western Europe. While these events shaped the global stage, in the Netherlands, the crackdown on resistance only intensified. The Nazis knew they were losing ground elsewhere, and in response, they doubled down on their repression in occupied territories, including the Netherlands. The winter of 1943 would be a time of impossible choices. Do you risk everything to fight back, or do you find a way to endure and survive? It was in this atmosphere of escalating violence, hope, and uncertainty that my grandfather lived and wrote in his journal. He was a young man caught between the world he had known and the future filled with unknowns. In the next section, we will open his journal for the first time, stepping into his words as he recounts the daily struggles, acts of defiance, and the impossible choices he and others had to make. Now, for the first time, we turn the pages of my grandfather's journal. His words, written in ink that has faded with time, are more than just memories. They are a glimpse into the choices, dangers, and quiet resistance of a young man living through war. As we read through these pages, we will uncover the first clues that suggest he may have been involved in something more than just survival. The details are subtle, but when cross-referenced with historical records and known resistance activities, a pattern begins to emerge. The journal opens with an entry from April 1944, describing a world where silence was survival. His words immediately paint a picture of a fractured life, filled with coded language, caution, and secrecy. As we turn to the very first page of my grandfather's journal, dated April 16, 1944, we immediately sense the weight of history pressing through his words. These entries are different, not just careful, but precise, filled with observations that, when cross-referenced with known events, reveal a chilling reality. This is where the story truly begins. What did he witness? What did he know? And most importantly, was he already more involved than we had ever imagined? April 16th, 1944. Reverend Van Ryn has accepted the position as the second pastor of Nijmegen. Today, candidate Jack Rosenberg from Haarlem preached. Now, this opening entry seems very benign, a simple note about church services. But in 1944, churches played a critical role in the resistance, both as places of sanctuary and as hubs of underground communication. Was this a coded message? Was this more than just a record of a sermon? Saturday, April 22nd, 1944. The successor of J, a certain Reiger, was shot dead at the station in Bedham. He and a few others were inspecting a train going to Dasville, possibly searching for people in hiding. He was shot in the stomach and died half a day later. He was the head of Schultenhaus and was known for treating his victims in a horrific manner. This is where everything changes. This passage directly references the assassination of Johannes Kehr, the brutal head of the Scholten House, a notorious Nazi headquarters in Groningen. Kehr, who had replaced police chief Anne Elzinga after his assassination by the resistance in 1943, was known for his merciless interrogations and executions. And yet, my grandfather records this event with startling detail. How did he know what happened? How did he know Kaiser's exact fate, his wounds, and his role in the Nazi machine? Why does he make note of his horrific treatment of victims, as if he had seen or heard about it firsthand? Could this be the moment we begin to see his connection to the underground resistance? Sunday, April 23rd, 1944. Morning service, DSS scheduled. In the afternoon, Reverend Loopstra gave a sermon urging youth to faithfully attend catechism and Bible study services. As a result of Ryer's immediate shootings, boys in Bedham and Holkirk and Burns in Groningen had to remain inside due to their injuries. This passage suggests something crucial. The resistance actions had consequences. The mention of staying inside due to injuries, was this an order from the underground? Were resistant members wounded in the shootout that killed Kehr? Did my grandfather know them? The weight of these words is not just in what they say, but in what they leave unsaid. Fear was in the air. Movement was restricted. The consequences of the resistance was unfolding in real time. April 28th, 1944. Rumors spread about the SD in the village stating that they were going to carry out an operation. They were reportedly riding bicycles and patrolling back and forth. People said that the Green Police was at the town hall to check the refugee register. In the end, nothing happened. Now, this passage captures the constant paranoia of living under occupation, and the SD, or the Nazi Intelligence Service, was notorious for raids and tracking down resistant members. The Green Police that were at the town hall checking names were a paramilitary Nazi police force responsible for enforcing occupation laws, conducting raids, and tracking down resistance members, Jews, and forced labor escapees. Their presence signaled immediate danger, and those in hiding knew to vanish before they came knocking. Now, this section is telling. Why did my grandfather know about the SD movements before they happened? How was he aware that they were checking refugee register at the town hall? Why does he conclude with, in the end, nothing happened? Was he waiting for an attack that never came? Was he preparing for something else? It feels less like an observation and more like a report. April 30th, 1944. Morning service by Candidate H. Roberts from M. Afternoon service by Reverend Steen Van Huysen. Now, after the tension of the previous entries, this one seems almost out of place. Or does it? Church services were often meeting points for the resistance. Was this a signal to somebody reading the journal? A note meant for another set of eyes? Or was this simply a young man clinging to normalcy in an abnormal world? This first page is packed with clues, tension, and direct connections to the resistant movements in Groningen. The assassination of Johannes Kehr, a known resistance action, the increased presence of the Scheissenhaus suggested Nazi retaliation, the mention of injured individuals being told to stay inside, potentially wounded resistors, the awareness of movements, patrols, and town hall investigations far beyond what an ordinary citizen might know. Was my grandfather simply writing what he saw? Or was he recording something more? A warning, a coded history, a report meant for someone else? These pages feel different because they are different. They read like someone walking the line between silent witness and active participant. In the next section, we will analyze more pages of his journal, going beyond what is written and into what is left unsaid. What more did he know? And was he truly just an observer, or was he part of something much larger? Each turn of the page brings us deeper into the reality of war. May 1944. Fear, betrayal, and uncertainty weave through my grandfather's words, his quiet observations of the world unraveling around him. What do we see in these pages? The tightening grip of Nazi control, the growing whispers of invasion, and the cost of defiance. May 4th, 1944. Pet Bowenkamp arrested with the raid truck. Lowen Van Veen suspected too, taken by the same truck. He tried to slip away. If he hadn't, maybe it would have gone well. These are not random arrests. This is the machinery of occupation at work. Who were these men? Were they resistant fighters, sympathizers, or simply in the wrong place at the wrong time? The fact that Lowen Van Veen tried to escape suggests he knew what was coming. Because he resisted, did he get hurt, or maybe he even got killed? May 5th, 1944. Invasion tension is high. They say it is as great as May 5th to the 10th, 1940. A large part of the German troops have left Groningen. I saw it myself. My grandfather is watching history unfold from his doorstep. May 1940 was the week the Netherlands fell. Now, 4 years later, those same fears return. In Liège, Belgium, the Germans blew up all the bridges because the English and the Americans were expected to drop paratroopers. When they landed, they turned out to be dummies. This was part of a broader deception campaign used by the Allies. Fake paratroopers, also known as Ruperts, were dropped to mislead German forces, causing panic and forcing them to waste resources. The Germans, fearing an airborne assault, destroyed key infrastructure to prevent troops from landing. Little did they know, the real invasion was still a month away. May 15th, 1944. The Reich Commissioner issued a letter, "Death to those who help the enemy." This is when the price of resistance becomes absolute. By 1944, helping an escaped prisoner, hiding a Jewish family, stealing food rations, all of it meant death. For the Dutch resistance, this wasn't just policy. This was a warning, a final attempt to break their will. But they did not break. May 21st, 1944. Willem Lanting and Gert Steinstra took the train this afternoon and left. This entry is deceptively simple, but in war, a train ride is never just a train ride. Were they fleeing? Were they joining the resistance elsewhere? Or were they being taken? There are no answers in my grandfather's words, only the stark reality of people disappearing from their everyday lives. Some left to fight, some left to hide, others were sent away and never returned. May 23rd, 1944. Around 3 a.m., a plane crashed behind Harmsel in Dolkum. It burned. 5 charred bodies were recovered, 1 survivor severely wounded. War leaves no room for dignity. A plane, a mission, men who would never return home. But this entry feels different. Not just something he heard about, something he knew. Why did my grandfather record this event so precisely? Was he there? Was he looking for survivors? Allied pilots who crashed in occupied territory had a slim chance of survival. But if the resistance found them first, they had a chance. Could that be why my grandfather wrote this down? Because he or someone he knew was there searching? One survivor, severely wounded. Who was he? Did he survive? And did my grandfather know what happened to him? My grandfather's journal does not tell us everything, but it shows us the shape of the world in chaos. Men arrested, resistance under siege, the dead stripping of identity, a nation waiting for something, for anything, to end the nightmare. And my grandfather watching it all, writing it down. But was he only watching? In this next section, we turn the page and the questions deepen. What did he do next? How much was he part of the resistance? How close did the war come to finding him? Join me as we step further into his world. During the period from June to July 1944, the Dutch resistance in Groningen area was actively engaged in various operations against German occupation. Several notable events and individuals from this time frame align with the dates and names mentioned in my grandfather's journal. The arrest of Jan Lever, July 21st, 1944. Jan Lever, a resistance fighter, was arrested and subsequently executed on July 21st, 1944, in Edam, a village in the province of Groningen. Initially, we thought my grandfather was talking about his older brother Jan, but as we dug deeper and cross-referenced dates, it became clear that he was likely referring to the resistance fighter Jan Lever, who was arrested and executed just 3 days later. In June of 1944, June 13th to be exact, Sonja Temmermans, a prominent resistant leader in Groningen, was arrested in Amsterdam. Prior to her arrest, she was organizing raids and sheltering those in hiding within the Groningen area. A journal entry from June 18, 1944, mentions my grandfather going into hiding. This aligns with the heightened risk for the resistant members following the key arrest of key figures like Temmermans. July 16, 1944, Johannes Post, a notable resistant leader, was executed on July 16, 1944, in Overveen. He had been instrumental in organizing resistance activities, including those in the northern provinces like Groningen. While post-execution occurred in Overveen, his influence and prior activities in the northern regions might have been precursors leading to the increased caution and movements among resistance members in Groningen during that period. The general resistance activities in Groningen in mid-1944 was involved in sheltering Jews, distributing illegal literature, and sabotaging German operations. The arrest of prominent figures often led to increased crackdowns by the German forces. The dates in my grandfather's journal correspond with periods of intensified resistance activities and subsequent German reprisals in the region. His movements and notes about going into hiding suggest a direct response to the escalating dangers faced by resistance members. We continue our journey into my grandfather's journal, uncovering the realities of life under Nazi occupation. In section 2 and 3, we found the first hints that he may have been more than just a young man trying to survive. His words, though careful and measured, suggest knowledge of arrests, sudden disappearances, and dangerous movements throughout the waterways. But what happens when we take a literary approach to his journal? What if we read his words not as simple documentations, but as carefully crafted accounts that concealed more than they revealed? Today, we'll go beyond the direct translation and bring his words to life, placing them in the world in which they were written, where every choice was a risk and every moment was shadowed by uncertainty. May 1944. A world in the shadows. The night is thick with silence. The floor is hard, and I do not move. The light from outside is dim, but enough to show the outline of boots passing in front of the window. A knock at the neighbor's door. My hands are stiff from waiting. I count my breaths. A quiet home, a single knock, and the passing of boots. How many nights like this did he endure? How often did he listen in silence, knowing that any moment could betray him? This entry aligns with the known Nazi razzia, sudden raids targeting young Dutch men for forced labor. The fear he described is not just anxiety, it's survival. Jan says it's time to move again. He's right. The eyes on the square are too many. Even the baker looks at me differently now. The market is no longer safe. Here we see Jan again, likely my grandfather's older brother, the one who escaped from a German labor camp. His words about too many eyes on the square align with what we know about the increased surveillance in Groningen during this time. Was the baker truly suspicious? Or was my grandfather becoming more aware of how easily trust could be misplaced? The boat is cold tonight. I work quietly. No light, no sound, just the creak of wood against the water. It will be finished by morning. The boat, again. This passage repeats an idea that we've seen before. Work done at night in silence under cover of darkness. What was he finishing? If we compare this to the known resistance activities in the regions, it could be many things. The loading of supplies, the smuggling of a person, or perhaps the repair of a vessel used for transport. The silence, the darkness, and the urgency suggest something far greater than a simple task. A woman with tired eyes passed today. She did not speak, only nodded. In her hands, a loaf of bread pressed tightly to her chest. She left before I could say a word. Now this passage is simple, but it holds weight. Was this woman a courier? Was she delivering coded message hidden in something as innocent as bread? During the occupation, resistance members often relied on silent exchanges, small gestures that conveyed entire messages. Did my grandfather know what she carried? Or was he just left wondering? The letter came today. One of them should not have. I must burn it. Now this passage is one of the most cryptic yet. Who sent the letter? Why was it dangerous? If we align with the known resistance communication tactics, messages were often disguised with innocent letters, using hidden meanings and double meanings to pass instructions. Burning a letter was a common method of destroying incriminating evidence. Had he received a message he wasn't supposed to? Or had someone made a mistake that could have cost lives? It's getting harder to tell who is who. Last night, a man spoke too loudly. Now he's gone. We do not say his name. Now this entry echoes the deep paranoia of the time. Was the man a resistance member? Had he been betrayed? In 1944, Nazi informants operated all over the Netherlands, many of them Dutch citizens, desperate to save themselves or curry favor with the occupiers. One wrong conversation, one misplaced trust could mean the difference between life and death. They say the trains run fuller now. They say the doors close tighter. No one sees them again. This is a chilling reference. By mid-1944, deportations of Jews and political prisoners from the Netherlands to concentration camps had reached their peak. The trains he writes about were likely bound for Westerbork, then on to Auschwitz or Sobor. The phrase, "no one sees them again," is the stark finality. He knew what those trains meant. The cold is different now. It is not just the air. It is the way people walk. It's the way people speak. Even the wind moves quieter. This final passage is one of the most poetic and revealing. Fear had settled into the very fabric of daily life. Even nature seemed to respond to the weight of war. My grandfather was not just an observer, he was living through the daily reality of occupation, where even the smallest movement or whisper could change everything. I worked today, enough to keep my place, a little food. No one asks questions, but we all know why we're here. Here, my grandfather reveals how survival was often transitional. Many in hiding were forced to work for shelter and food, blending in as best as they could. But beneath the surface, everyone knew the truth, why they were there, and what they were running from, and who might be watching. The wool spins fine tonight. My hands remember small things, threads that hold. This entry is profound. This is where the woven in courage finds its meaning. My grandfather would take raw wool and spin it into bobbins of yarn, as a task simple and deeply symbolic. Even in hiding, even in fear, he created something. This act, turning something raw and fragile into something useful, something strong, became a reflection of his resistance. As we move further into my grandfather's journal, something shifts. The tone, the structure, even the way he records his days. Everything changes. The careful, cautious notes of the previous entries, filled with uncertainty and whispers of resistance, give way to something more urgent, more deliberate. Why? After analyzing these next few pages and cross-referencing them with historical events, resistance movements, and known Nazi crackdowns in the regions, we believe we have the answer. In this episode, we've uncovered so much, yet there's still more to reveal. The next pages of my grandfather's journal contain the strongest evidence yet of his possible involvement in the resistance. In the next episode, we will speak the words directly from his journal, letting his story unfold as he wrote it. In his own words, in the shadow of war, what secrets lie in the pages ahead? What risks did he take? And how did his journey shape the man he would become? Join me as we turn the next page in history. Stay curious, stay engaged, and never stop chasing that great adventure. That's it for this episode of The Day's Adventure. Remember, stay curious, stay engaged, and never stop chasing the next great adventure. The world is full of wonders, and your next journey is just one episode away. To keep the adventure alive, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Blue Sky. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for the video versions and exclusive behind-the-scenes content. Want more? Hit subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you'll never miss the next thrilling episode. The world's waiting. See you next time on The Day's Adventure.